Dear friends, welcome, bienvenue to this global webinar in the Laudato Si week. My name is Dr. Martin Kopp. I will be your moderator today, and it is really a pleasure to welcome you in this webinar on fossil fuels, violence, and the climate crisis. Symbolically, maybe as you can see behind me, I am speaking to you from Paris, France, where today is the day of the General Assembly of the French multinational TotalEnergies. So we are right in the theme of today's webinar. I would like to welcome into this space Monseigneur Jean-Pierre Vuillemin. Monseigneur Jean-Pierre Vuillemin is the Apostolic Administrator of the Diocese of Metz in France. He is in charge of integral ecology for the French Bishops' Conference inside the Family and Society Commission. The French Bishops' Conference is just finishing a 3-year synodal journey on integral ecology, and Monseigneur Jean-Pierre Vuillemin will welcome us into an introductory prayer. The word is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Au nom du Père, du Fils et du Saint-Esprit. Amen. Ô Seigneur notre Dieu, qu'il est grand ton nom par toute la terre. Together. Ô Seigneur notre Dieu, qu'il est grand ton nom par toute la terre. Laura peut lire le psaume 8. Je ne vous entends pas, Laura.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui, je vous entends. You can read.
Très bien. OK.
Yes.
Ô Seigneur, notre Dieu, qu'il est grand ton nom par toute la terre. Jusqu'aux cieux, ta splendeur est chantée. Par la bouche des enfants, des tout-petits, rempart que tu opposes à l'adversaire, où l'ennemi se brise en sa révolte. À voir ton ciel, ouvrage de tes doigts, la lune et les étoiles que tu fixas. Qu'est-ce que l'homme pour que tu penses à lui, le fils d'un homme pour que tu t'en soucies? Tu l'as voulu un peu moindre qu'un Dieu, le couronnant de gloire et d'honneur. Tu l'établis sur les œuvres de tes mains, tu mets toutes choses à ses pieds. Les troupeaux de bœufs et de brebis, et même les bêtes sauvages, les oiseaux du ciel et les poissons des mers, tout ce qui va son chemin dans les eaux.
Ô Seigneur notre Dieu, qu'il est grand ton nom par toute la terre. Ô Seigneur notre Dieu, qu'il est grand par toute la terre. Évangile de Saint Jean, chapitre 13. Avant la fête de la Pâque, sachant que l'heure était venue pour lui de passer de ce monde à son Père, Jésus, ayant aimé les siens qui étaient dans le monde, les aima jusqu'au bout. Au cours du repas, alors que le diable a déjà mis dans le cœur de Judas, fils de Simon l'Iscariote, l'intention de le livrer, Jésus, sachant que le Père a tout remis entre ses mains, qu'il est sorti de Dieu et qu'il s'en va vers Dieu, se lève de table, dépose son vêtement et prend un linge qu'il se noue à la ceinture. Puis il verse de l'eau dans un bassin. Alors il se mit à laver les pieds des disciples et à les essuyer avec le linge qu'il avait à la ceinture. Les pieds sont les membres de notre corps qui signifient le mieux le mouvement. mais il signifie également l'humilité du disciple qui, assis aux pieds du maître, se laisse enseigner. Le geste du lavement des pieds accompli par Jésus est un enseignement qu'il nous faut constamment méditer. Il signifie l'abaissement du maître qui nous enseigne la vraie domination. Savoir dominer notre désir de toute puissance. Si Dieu ose mettre toute chose à nos pieds, c'est qu'il croit en notre capacité à nous laisser enseigner par le don de son amour pour toute la création. Si toute chose semble être à nos pieds, nous devons en retour suivre l'exemple du Maître qui se fait serviteur. Nous apprendrons alors à devenir les bons intendants de la création que Dieu nous confie.
Seigneur, nous te prions. Nous sommes en perpétuel mouvement. Transforme les êtres agités que nous sommes en disciples missionnaires infatigables sur les chemins de la conversion. Inspire-nous sagesse et force pour soutenir notre humanité dans la recherche de styles de vie et de modes de développement capables de transformer la menace en promesse. Soutiens tous les acteurs du mouvement Laudato Si, qu'ils désirent se laisser enseigner par ta parole de vérité, qu'ils ne cessent de se mettre aux pieds de leur maître, qui les rassemble et les envoie.
Comme nous l'avons appris du Sauveur et selon son commandement, nous osons dire : Notre Père qui es aux cieux, que ton nom soit sanctifié, que ton règne vienne, que ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain de ce jour. Pardonne-nous nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons aussi à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous laisse pas entrer en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Prions. Entends nos prières, Seigneur, et daigne les exaucer. Toi qui vis et règnes pour les siècles des siècles. Amen. Que Dieu Tout-Puissant nous bénisse, le Père, le Fils et le Saint-Esprit. Amen. Have a good discussions and have a good meeting and afternoon. See you later. Au revoir.
Au revoir indeed, and thank you very much to Bishop Vuillemin and to Laura Morosini for leading us into this introductory time of prayer. It is now my honor to introduce the first and main speaker of this webinar, Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs is university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He's president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, co-chair of the UN Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, and academician of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, among other duties and titles. He has been the special advisor to 3 United Nations Secretary General and currently serves as an SDG advocate under Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez. Welcome very, very much among us. Bienvenue. And
Merci.
let me hand the speaking baton to you without further delay.
Thank you so much. Greetings to everybody. Thank you for letting me be part of the Laudato Si week. And we meet at a very difficult time in the world. The crises continue to multiply. We have the climate crisis, of course, but we have the pandemic continuing. We have war in Ukraine, and we have profound geopolitical tensions. And none of this is in the least satisfactory, of course. The danger and drift in the world is the worst that it has been in decades. We're back at least to Cold War and to potentially much worse. And I think this is why Pope Francis's voice in Laudato Si, in Fratelli Tutti, in his warnings that we are already in a World War III, are so crucial for the world. And we have to help make these words heard more widely and understood. I'm extremely concerned about the lack of leadership virtually in all parts of the world on these issues. I'm especially concerned about the lack of leadership from the United States, because that's my own country, and the United States plays such an important role in the world, and not a very happy one in my view right now, because the US is focused almost entirely on geopolitics, on war, on the competition with Russia and China, and not on the safety of the planet, and not even on peacemaking. Even the pandemic is barely to be seen in our public policy. And I would say that the drift all over the world, because of so many confusions, so much nationalism, so little understanding of the real common stakes on the planet, mean that we are failing to solve the problems as they arise. I'm not sure where in 15 or 20 minutes to put my focus right now, but I would say that we need to do 4 things absolutely to save this world, save ourselves, and change a direction that is becoming vastly more dangerous by the day. The first is to end the war in Ukraine. And this cannot be ended on the battlefield. The only end to the war is at the negotiating table. And all people of goodwill everywhere need to demand that Russia and Ukraine sit down to negotiate, not waiting for victory, not what Mr. Zelensky says, that we'll talk after Russia is pushed out of Ukraine, but talk now. And the United States, as the protagonist of NATO, needs to sit down with Russia, because Russia raised serious concerns also about NATO, and the US has serious concerns about Russia's invasion, and the two need to negotiate as well. There is no alternative to negotiating. And with negotiations, a peace could be reached based on a non-enlargement of NATO based on a neutral Ukraine and a withdrawal of Russian forces from that country. And this is the first step for any kind of problem solving. Because with war going on, all attention, focus, finance is drained to war. And all instincts are in the wrong direction of escalation. And the rhetoric and the harshness take over. And without cooperation and diplomacy, we can't solve any other problems. So the war is also a barrier to progress in any other areas, I'm afraid to say. So that, to my mind, is the first order of business. The second order of business is to stop this pandemic, because it is now continuing to surge and to continue to endanger the most vulnerable and poorest people in the world who still haven't had access to vaccines or the medicines that are needed. We continue to get new variants of this virus. We've lost interest. It became boring in the rich countries, so there's no talk of face masks. There's no basic public health measures anymore. And yet the pandemic itself remains extraordinarily dangerous. We have not had basic cooperation between the United States, China, India, Europe, the vaccine producers, to ensure that these vaccines and now an increasing number of medicines can reach the people who need them, and that the world continues to take precaution and cooperates on ways to reduce the rate of transmission of this disease. So this is a second business that incredibly, as of May 2022, after 2.5 years of this pandemic, we still don't have basic global cooperation to discuss this. But of course, we're not discussing almost anything right now at a global scale. So that leads me to the third and the fourth points. The third point is a general point, and that is back in 2015, all of the world's governments committed to sustainable development as the overarching framework of global cooperation. They did this twice, first in September, on September 25th, 2015, Pope Francis opened a special session of the UN General Assembly. And after Pope Francis spoke to world leaders about the need for a plan for our common home, the world leaders adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is the closest we come to a global framework for decency on the planet. And you can think of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals as our generation's statement about universal human rights, including the rights to the basic economic needs and to a safe environment. Well, we've adopted these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but we're not financing them. We're not cooperating to achieve them. The United States government almost says not a word about them because we're so selfish at the political level, it's unimaginable. And we said that these goals were to be met by 2030, and obviously they will not be met by 2030, but we need to meet these objectives. So that's the third order of business. Pope Francis says in Laudato Si that our interdependence obliges us to think of a plan for our common home. That's the essence of what we need. And the SDGs give us that broad framework. The second thing that was adopted in 2015 was the Paris Agreement on December 12th, 2015. Once again, Pope Francis played a very important role, not only through Laudato Si, but also in calling personally many world leaders to emphasize how important it is that they sign on to a global plan. And incidentally, when Laudato Si was issued, there were many voices, even within the Catholic world, that said, why is the Pope talking about climate change? What does he know about climate change? And of course, Laudato Si is not only scientifically sound, but I would emphasize that the Holy See has an extraordinary resource, and that is the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. And I was honored and privileged to be part of many meetings at the Vatican on the technical aspects of climate change, on both the sources of the climate change, on the anthropogenic or human inputs to the climate change, and on the solutions. And it was the best evidence collected in the world. And so when the Pope wrote Laudato Si and issued it, he was basing it on the Vatican's collection and processing of the very best up-to-date scientific and technological information available. So the message of Laudato Si contributed directly to this second achievement, the Paris Climate Agreement, and that is the fourth of our great challenges. Stop the war, stop the pandemic, orient towards the Sustainable Development Goals, and address the climate change urgency, which continues whether or not we are paying attention. Earth has already warmed 1.2 degrees Celsius relative to the pre-industrial average, which is taken to be the 40-year period, 1880 to 1920. And that warming has already put Earth's climate as the warmest period of the entire period of civilization. Of the last 10,000 years, we're outside, beyond, warmer than any average during that 10,000 year period. So we are already in a danger zone, and the warming is continuing at around 0.3 to 0.4 degrees Celsius per decade now. We're almost surely going to exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was agreed in Paris as the upper limit that we should be striving to avoid. But we're going to breach that. And Earth is going to get more and more dangerous as the warming continues. We already have record heat waves, droughts, floods, rising sea levels, new disease infestations, pests, crop failures with what we have now, but it's going to get worse and get worse rapidly. Unless, well, I shouldn't say unless, because it is going to get worse, but it's going to get disastrously worse unless we make the decisive change of our energy and land use systems to stop pushing Earth into a higher and higher temperature. And we know what that entails. That entails a mass conversion of the energy system from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and a massive shift of our farm systems from extensive farming based on deforestation to intensive high productivity farming within the areas that we have now without further deforestation, and indeed with reforestation and recuperation of degraded land to capture more carbon in the vegetative cover and in the soils. Well, every country needs a plan for that, and each region of the world along watersheds that are shared between many countries need a shared plan. And we need cooperation across the regions between Asia, North America, Europe, Latin America, Africa. But what are we doing instead? The US is busy building military alliances, trash-talking China. And of course, Russia and the US are engaged in a disastrous proxy war in Ukraine at Ukraine's expense. So this is our job. First, to understand these four overarching challenges. And then I would say to learn the lesson of Fratelli Tutti, which is that we are completely interdependent and that we must encounter the other so that we cooperate on these shared vital interests. And if we can do our job to say to each of our governments, talk with other governments, cooperate with other governments, negotiate with other governments. Don't champion this military buildup. It's a disaster. Stop the war, start the solutions for sustainable development and for decarbonization, for the massive buildup of renewable energy, and do it cooperatively, because every part of the world, with whatever form of government, needs to be at the table, because we are absolutely in a common crisis, and that crisis is now of a shared danger for everybody on this planet. Maybe I'll close with some very wise words of President Kennedy that I'd like to quote, who uttered them after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred 60 years ago this year and brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. And Kennedy and Khrushchev were smart enough and humane enough and decent enough to understand that the Cuban Missile Crisis had to be resolved through diplomacy, not by victory on a battlefield, which would have destroyed humanity. And after the Cuban Missile Crisis was ended through diplomacy and compromise, with both sides eliminating their tactical nuclear weapons that were close to the border of the other, the Soviet Union removing its nuclear weapons from Cuba and the United States removing its nuclear weapons in Turkey aimed at the Soviet Union. The two sides went on to actually negotiate a peace treaty the following year, the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And Kennedy gave a wonderful speech in June 1963 calling for peace, the kind of speech that I wish we would hear from an American president now. And he said some things that are very wise, most importantly, that Americans had to re-examine their own attitudes towards peace, because it was the American belief that there was some inevitability to war, which was the greatest danger of all. And so he emphasized that in a conflict, both sides are human, both sides have a shared interest, both sides can find a way to peace. And so he said the following, and I'll close with this: so let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Thank you very much for enabling me to be with you in the Laudato Si week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Professor Sachs. We have just a few questions. The first one would be, what is the number one action you recommend for our viewers today?
That we pray for peace and we call on our governments to end this war immediately. And that we know that there is an outcome in which Ukraine can be secure, in which Russia can have its security needs met, and in which there can be peace restored. This is the most important thing. We need to end the war so that we start to direct attention to problem solving.
Thank you. Staying with peace and solution, the Agency for Renewable Energies in Europe was called Irena, the queen or the goddess of peace. Faith-based institutions have been divesting from fossil fuels this year, and now will you speak a bit about the power of this action?
Yes, so we need the values-based investing, and that is not to maximize value of some financial wealth, but to maximize the human values that direct our investments to human purposes. And so the divestments, I think, are very important for our own souls and for our own institutional functioning. They are not sufficient, of course, because even when we divest, it turns out others are continuing to invest in fossil fuels, even buying the assets that some divestors sell, and then doubling down on new fossil fuel projects. We need governments to create a legal framework, a regulatory framework, a financial framework that prioritizes investments in renewable energy. I'll tell you the problem, though. In the United States, just as one example, the chairman of our Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, Senator Joe Manchin, owns 2 coal companies. That's his family's business, is coal. And that is why he blocks all climate legislation. And in the United States, our political system is very corrupt. The campaign contributions are legal, so it's a legal kind of corruption that channels big fossil fuel interest money to especially the Republican Party, but also to senators like Senator Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat. And so our governments don't act. And this is a big issue. So divestment is very important, but so too we have to raise the voice to demand that our governments fulfill what they claimed to be their objective in the Paris Agreement and in the Agenda 2030, because SDG 7 calls for renewable energy for all. SDG 13 calls for climate safety for all.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the idea of ecological conversion? And do you think that there are limits to the Enlightenment idea of rational self-interest? That's a question coming from the viewers.
Yes. Let me just discuss rational self-interest. It is not rational to be interested only in oneself. If we're interested only in ourselves, we end up lonely, unhappy, and in a world of violence. So I believe in rationality, but I don't believe in rational self-interest. I believe in rational common interest, in which our individual interests are also part of our community well-being. And in Jewish thinking, there's a famous statement by a sage, first century sage Hillel, who said, if I am not for myself, who is for me? If I am not for others, what am I? And if not now, then when? And what this means is, of course, that we have a self-interest, but we also have an interest to others. Otherwise, we're not human beings. We're not living the kind of life that we should be living. I think this philosophy of self-interest got misunderstood by especially British philosophers in the 17th and 18th centuries. We had Hobbes, who wrote around 1640 to 1660. We had Locke at the end of the 17th century. We had Hume and Smith, and they all wrote about self-interest and thought that the world could operate basically on a basis of self-interest. There's some footnotes to that because Hume and Smith also talked about human sympathy, but they basically believed that the world could be organized on the basis of self-interest. And Smith propounded the idea that self-interest, guided by an invisible hand of market forces, would be the best kind of economic life. We know this is not true because if we're only guided by self-interest, we end up with a very cruel society, very unequal, very cruel, and unable to cultivate the common good, the common interest. So we need a new kind of economic philosophy. I think the church's social teachings are very important for that. And this is the work of the Economy of Francesco that Pope Francis has called for and based in Assisi, which I think is an extremely important initiative of young people to create a new economic theory, an economic framework that is compatible with our full human nature. I also like to refer to Aristotle because in the Ethics, he talks about our human nature as requiring not only our own moderation, but friendship. Book 8 of the Nicomachean Ethics is about friendship. Friendship is crucial, and not friendship of self-interest, friendship of real interest in the other. That's also what Fratelli Tutti is about.
Thank you very much to Laura Morosini for leading us into this question moment. Thank you again to you, merci, to Professor Sachs for the keynote and answering our questions.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Fossil fuels, violence, and the climate crisis is the general theme that brings us together from many parts of the world, as I have seen in the messages in the chat. This diversity of countries among us reflects that this theme finds its reality in a number of contexts and concrete projects. We are now going to hear about 3 specific issues and struggles. First, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, also known as EACOP, which is a new oil project linking Uganda and Tanzania. Second, the situation in Ukraine and its link with fossil fuels. And third, Line 3, which is the name of a proposed pipeline which would run from Canada to the United States of America. We will hear about these from great speakers who are people committed on the ground and who speak from experience. The first speaker that I would like to introduce will present EACOP in his own words, but also with a video. His name is Omar El Mawi. He is an environmental lawyer and a coordinator of the Stop EACOP and Decolonize campaign. Omar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, for inviting me. And definitely there is no better time to have this conversation than right now when we are having the Africa Week, and today being the Africa Day, where we are celebrating the developments and improvements we've seen as a continent, but also looking at some of the things that we've gotten wrong and how we can make that better. As a way of background, I definitely come from a continent that has over 600 million people without access to electricity and energy. It's also a continent that has only contributed to less than 4% of the historical emissions from carbon emissions. And therefore, we have contributed the least to the current crisis that we are facing, but we are also facing the most of the impacts. Talk about cyclones, talk about droughts, talk about famine, talk about floods, and many, many other climate change crises that are, showing themselves in the faces of these natural occurrences. And therefore, to this end, there is a lot of argument from African countries that because we haven't contributed much to the problem that we're seeing, then they're talking about fossil fuels as a way to transition, and they're even going a step further to call it a just transition so that we can get to where our colleagues have reached as far as energy is concerned. But what we are losing is really an opportunity for us to avoid emissions and show how we can move forward as a continent and leapfrog this dirty fossil fuel energy and gaining the most from profits. So I'm here to give you a story about the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, which is going to be the world's longest heated pipeline in the world, which stands at about 1,445 kilometers. It's cutting across two countries in East Africa. One is called Tanzania and one is in Uganda. So it starts from Uganda and goes 1,400 kilometers to Tanzania, so that this oil that has been discovered in Uganda can be exploited, extracted, and evacuated to Tanzania so that it can be shipped to external markets. And it's the same story for most of the fossil fuels that are being discovered in Africa. They are not for domestic consumption, not that I'm making a case for that, but they are mostly to be taken away to other countries for consumption. And in many ways, it shows that while all of the African countries have supposedly attained freedom and they've beaten colonization, but we're still losing our resources in the same model and way that we were losing them when we didn't have our freedoms. And therefore, what this shows is that as a continent, we really need to wake up and speak up against these projects and call for an alternative platform or development pathway that would be benefiting us. So for the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, there are many concerns that you're raising. I mean, when you talk about how it affects people, more than 100,000 people are going to be displaced, and those are indirectly displaced because of the corridor, but still there are going to be millions more that are going to be affected by either not being able to access their land that they're using for their livelihoods, like farming, tourism, and others. There are also those who won't be able to access or their livelihood stands to be threatened because up to a third of the pipeline is located within the Lake Victoria Basin. And what this means is if a leak happens around this area, then the Lake Victoria stands to be affected, which is a resource that supports up to 40 million people for fresh water as well as also for food production. And therefore, for us, all these are things that stand to be affected. There are many concerns that we are raising around nature because the pipeline passes across more than 200 rivers between Uganda and Tanzania. It's passing across more than 400 villages that are well dominated by people who are living within these regions. We're talking about, two of the important lakes in Uganda, Lake Albert and Lake Victoria, which the pipeline also, passes through across their basins. And therefore, if anything happens within these regions, then it's a really, really huge impact. And finally, there's the issue around, because this oil that's going to be evacuated, it's at peak capacity, the pipeline will be passing around 200,000 barrels of oil in a day. And this, just quick arithmetic, you'll realize it comes to about 70 million barrels of oil in a year. And what this means is that oil, if consumed, then it will be injecting up to about 34 million tons of carbon emissions every year. And therefore, it's taking us many, many steps back as far as our journey to try and stop fossil fuel extraction and also curbing the climate crisis. And therefore, as a continent and as a region, this is going to take us really far back as far as taking climate action is concerned. But more importantly, is that there are better alternatives that we have on our pathway. And as I just finished, if we talk about renewable energy capacity in Africa, about 40% of the current estimates or available renewable capacity is based in Africa. We talk about geothermal, wind, solar, and others, which we have in plentiful, and there are options that we can utilize. So all we are saying is this. I mean, we don't have an alternative home, and definitely let's not sell the African region for the benefit of a few corporate entities at the expense of the whole Africa and Africans. I'm looking forward to any questions you may have. And back to you, Dr.
Thank you so much, Omar, for introducing us to these climate bombs and these projects indeed affecting East Africa. And to hear and learn even more, we have a little video that we would like to share with all of you, and we are looking now.
My land has affected my life totally. I have lost totally due to the oil activities, and all this has been caused by Total. My family situation is bad, is hunger. My children are no longer going to school because of the 3 acres of land I was stopped to use by the oil company.
Kuwaza nilikukizo kyange kiete lyange linya kunduma akudwa kwata wo usente udoli nyasemere kwa moyo ati usente nya usasirima banza nyeri kusigala usa nyeri akwezizukire ite lyange lya nyambenge hoyi ebiro nebiro.
Intimidation was very, very, very high. They came at our place here several times. Those at Atakama, Petroleum Authority, Total, to intimidate us, to sign and to force us to sign.
They told us when you refuse to get to sign for that money, they will take your money in court. You know, we fear when we women in the community, when we had a court, we fear.
Thank you very much. And thanks to this video, we see and we experience once again that there is nothing more powerful to hearing directly from the people who are affected by a situation locally. And this is the case with our second situation that we are speaking this afternoon. And I would like to speak about Ukraine and the link between the war and fossil fuels, to welcome here Dr. Svitlana Romanko, who is a Ukraine-based climate activist and environmental lawyer as well, who has worked with 350.org and the Laudato Si movement. She's still a friend of those organizations. She launched and she currently coordinates the Stand with the Ukraine campaign. Svitlana, we are honored to have you among us, and the floor is yours. You can go ahead, Svitlana. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today and providing me space to talk. And I truly apologize for some noise that can happen, but I'm speaking. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. You can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. You can speak to us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me here today, because it's always very valuable to bring the experience that we are facing as Ukrainians during these horrific times of the war against our country. And to acknowledge this, I have to say that Putin's money, power, and leverage that leads this fossil fuel war against my country came from oil and gas, and oil companies specifically have propped this up. And without revenues from oil and gas, Russia's war machine would not be able to function. And the war in Ukraine and the existential threat of climate chaos have the same roots, and these roots are fossil fuels. The sooner we can rid our economies of their fossil fuel dependency, the sooner we can bring peace and security to all the humanity. But here I would like to pause a bit and just imagine a life of ordinary Ukrainian for a moment, and which consists of ongoing air alarms, of huge and frequent bombarding and missiles just flowing on the territory and destroying our infrastructure and killing civilians, children. And I believe you've all just seen into, because it's on the news, it's a big tragedy of Ukrainians in these wars, that thousands and thousands have been killed and express huge violence and terror and genocide. Do we have a hope as Ukrainians that we can end this war and then we can defeat Putin's autocratic regimes that has been fueled by fossil fuels? I truly believe, yes, we can do that. We can do that, and because the war in Ukraine is not another war. I truly on this planet, because it's hugely impacted more than 1.2 billion people all over the world, and keeps doing this impact in 107 countries already. And I believe all other wars and conflicts that are happening now in many regions of our planet also deserve some peace and justice. And what we can do next about this, it's very important. First of all, it's important to hold those who are in power accountable for what they are doing. So I cannot say that.
It seems that we might have lost our speaker. I will just give her a chance to join us again. Do you hear us, Svitlana? No, it seems she's not with us anymore. What I propose is that we...
Sorry.
Oh.
Yes, I am sorry. And yes, thank you. And I don't think that we should keep dictators and those fossil-fueled countries that sit on a large reserves of oil and gas secure. No, because some of them are war criminals and they have to be held accountable, including Putin. How to do that? I know a few ways, and I believe that we are all in just following those ways as Ukrainians and people who expresses the international solidarity. And I would say that what we can do right now to stop the weapons of mass destruction that fossil fuels became, and what we can do specifically about that, we can endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is happening broadly around all Catholics around the world. And for now, there is some ray of hope that these countries that will endorse the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, will commit not to proliferating fossil fuels and just keeping them in the ground. Among those important institutions, Catholic institutions that have joined recently the call for endorsement of Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is Latin American and Caribbean Catholic Bishops' Council, Prelator of Italtuba, Archbishopric of San Juan de Cuyo, and many others. So in general, there are 11 Catholic institutions who supported this call, and the most of them are from Indonesia, Brazil, Latin America and the Caribbean, Argentina, and Italy, but global, United States of America, Spain. So we truly believe in global solidarity that will help us to end the fossil fuel and climate hostile war. For that purpose, we also launched Stand With Ukraine campaign that Laudato Si movement also supported. So we call on a full embargo on Russian fossil fuel, oil and gas that has to be imposed by the European Union countries and every country that imports Russian oil and gas. But to say so, it's imperative that we not increase exploration in any other regions of the world that is currently happening towards African continent. Senegal just recently committed to have a gas deal with Russia, with Germany, sorry, not with Russia, but with Germany. And we all know that tragedies that EACOP and huge pressure that EACOP is facing as well. And we stand with Ukraine, but also in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in EACOP and beyond. And another powerful
Yes,
act
thank you, Svetlana. I'm afraid we are reaching the end of our time. Thank you very much for...
I just wanted to say that we very last sentence award. We all have to divest from fossil fuel industry as soon as possible, and we have to make additional pressure on oil and gas industry as a Total Energies that has been under huge pressure today in Paris for their annual AGM meeting. And so we need to change the system until the system creates more wars as in Ukraine. Because if we won't do it, if we won't stand on for justice and for ending fossil fuels everywhere, there won't be the last war, unfortunately, I am afraid. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being with us, and rest reassured, it's okay for the interruption. We know that you're in Paris fighting your fight, and we are very grateful for you being among us. And speaking about divestment, we are now pasting in the chat a link to a survey that will help you all, dear participants, to learn more about divestment and obtain resources so that we can help you to commit to divestment. So please check this survey. And we move forward, but stay in the European context, as we are going to hear from two more people. The first one is Davide Panzeri. Davide leads EACOP's European program and is the liaison with EACOP's European networks. A journalism graduate, he worked in particular on energy security, coal policy, carbon pricing, and also on climate change diplomacy during a secondment to the European External Action Service in Brussels. His area of focus currently includes the review of the Stability and Growth Pact, the EU Taxonomy, and the Fit for 50 package. So we have a true expert among us on these issues, and I'm very happy to pass you the speaking baton, Davide.
Thank you very much, Martin, and I'm very glad to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you all. What my intervention is going to be today is about the taxonomy, or in other words, how do you know when you want to divest from fossil fuels and when you want to invest in green solutions? How do you know what is green and what is not? And this is the question and the big issue, which is very important for anyone of us who wants to invest in the green future and divest from fossil fuels. But it's also a question for bigger financial enterprises, for anyone who wants to bet on a greener future, which is not just an ethical and, as we've heard, a bet for peace, but is also a bet which makes financial sense, because there is a future for green, there is a future for the transition, there is no future for the fossil fuels. And what Europe has done is to propose a taxonomy of economic activities. A taxonomy is a classification of economic activities, and basically the purpose is to set a standard which can tell us what is green and what is not. And the standard is quite high. So in the intention, the standard is what is green is what is aligned with one of the objectives of the transition and does no significant harm to any of the same objectives. So it's not enough to foster one of these objectives, but it's also necessary not to have any side effects against any of those. The legislation was introduced last year, and this year the Commission has introduced the required delegated act. However, nothing is so simple and nothing is as easy as it seems, because following lobbying inevitably from some member states, and inevitably there are economic interests behind it for certain industries, the Commission has now introduced a complementary delegated act, as you might have known, last February, which classifies as green under certain circumstances, but which are quite generous, gas investments and nuclear investments. Now, there are reasons why nuclear and gas might be considered transitional activities, but that's a conversation for another day. What is clear is that neither nuclear nor gas are without consequences, negative consequences on the environment, and are not sustainable. So to say that they are green, it goes against the science-based approach, which should be at the basis and sustain the whole infrastructure of giving certainty about what is green and what is not. Otherwise, with these two activities included as green, the whole infrastructure of giving the certainty to every one of us, as well as to financial institutions, of what is a green investment is undermined. Because if you or I go to someone and say, I want to invest my money in something that is green, you might be investing in something that you think is green, but is actually fossil fuels. And we have seen particularly, and we've heard also today, how fossil fuels, but also nuclear, are linked to supply chains which come from Russia. And so those supplies that come from Russia, we pay and go and foster this war that has Putin has waged against Ukraine. So being green has become not just a case of, and possibly has always been just a case of economic and environmental sense, but a case of providing peace. So it even makes less sense for us to confuse through the taxonomy what is green and what is not. So what could have been and can still be a great opportunity to be clear about what is green and what is not is now being lost with the introduction of gas and nuclear. So what is now happening? The proposal has been introduced by the Commission in February. If nothing happens and neither the European Council nor the Parliament object, this will become legislation and this really powerful instrument will be undermined. However, while it is really difficult for Council to the European Council to vote against this because of the politics and the need for 20 countries out of 27, there is an ongoing campaign to try and persuade members of the European Parliament to vote against. And there is a necessity for just a simple majority of 353 parliamentarians against 705, which is no easy feat because this is a cross-cutting issue which has lots of reasons, lots of people who are for and against. And although an amendment has been proposed in the Parliament, which has support from all the political groups, is not yet clear whether there will be enough votes to reject this complementary delegated act with gas and nuclear. So I would encourage you, if it's possible, if you have contact with one of your members of European Parliament, to go and tell them that you want them to vote against this complementary delegated act, it's still possible to stop it. And it would be really important to do so, because if Europe can show that it's possible to classify in a scientific and sound way what is green and what is not, this would give everyone else the certainty to be able to follow through with their actions, and also give an example to the rest of the world that it's possible to do it. It's possible to classify it. And then
Indeed,
other
it is
countries...
possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it will be possible for other countries to follow suit. And I'll close here.
Thank you so much, Davide. Thank you so much. It is possible. It is a good recommendation that we can all follow through, especially here in our context. And speaking of the European context, I would like to now invite Sylvie Boukhari de Pontual. And you see here my French accent is put to good use. To join us, Sylvie is the president of CCFD Terre Solidaire. It is a French NGO involved in almost 70 countries in partnership with local organizations that are struggling against all forms of injustice. Lawyer, member of the Paris Bar from 1985 to 2016. She is a specialist and activist of human rights and the fight against torture. She was also the president of the International Federation of Christians Against Torture Organizations. She has a deep knowledge in international solidarity, and on the top of all of this, she's teaching at the Catholic University of Paris. It's an honor to have you among us, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, je vais m'exprimer en français. Juste en introduction liminaire, je rappellerai que l'encyclique Laudato Si a servi d'électrochoc pour les catholiques, et notamment les catholiques de France, en leur faisant prendre conscience de la situation de notre maison commune face à la destruction massive des écosystèmes et de l'exploitation des individus. C'est dans ce cadre-là que depuis plus de 60 ans, vous l'avez rappelé, le CCFD Terre Solidaire, qui est un service de l'Église catholique de France, essaie de se battre pour l'écologie intégrale avant même qu'elle ne soit consacrée par l'encyclique du pape François. Avec nos partenaires, qui sont des organisations non gouvernementales, des sociétés civiles des pays du Sud, au fur et à mesure des années, nous avons pris conscience dans notre combat commun de l'urgence de réduire, de limiter la puissance financière, diplomatique, juridique, politique de l'industrie fossile, essentiellement par deux moyens.
Sylvie, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to check in with you, we've realized we do not have translation from French to other languages. It's only from English to the other languages. I wonder, are you comfortable trying to say it in English, or is it too hard?
It's quite hard. I understand that there is translation, because what Laura Morosini told me.
It was just to ask, just in case. So what I would invite you is then to continue with your text, and maybe I will
try.
Yes,
I
great.
try. Well, we use two ways to make some fight against the big companies of fossil industry. One is the divestment, and the second is the fight through the action in justice way. First, the divestment. Since, I think 10 years, CCFD Terre Solidaire systematically disinvested from fossil energies. So it means that we create a committee, a special committee, to evacuate all the financial investment to our non-governmental organization, our foundation, our microcredit fund, Éthique et Partage, and we control that there are absolutely no fossil investments. At the time, since 10 years, we received many critical remarks, because everybody didn't understand that NGOs like us could divestment from big companies which get some very earn a lot of money. But we did it. We continue to did it until now, and we try to make adequation between the gospel and the social doctrine of church and our practice in financial investment. The second way that we use is what we call in French the vigilance duty. We are the first country in France to create a special law about that. And the way to set up that is the action in justice with EACOP that Omar told us. In 2009, the CCFD Terre Solidaire has a strategical objective to end up the impunity of the big companies, because we noticed that they made a lot of human rights violations. So to do that, we try to participate to negotiation between French Parliament, before French Parliament, and also before the European Parliament, and before the Human Rights Council of Human Rights of United Nations. So first, we try to fight to obtain, to get the respect of human rights through justice. And we made some law action, especially in the EACOP case. Now this case is before the Supreme Court of France, and we hope that the Supreme Court is positive for our claim. And the second way is to make some lobby against the official government, French government, not only from the official government, but also with the help of the general NGOs and Catholic NGOs. So we continue to try to support and to extend the collective and network to make this fight.
Beautiful. And thank you so much. You said it would be very difficult. It seemed easy almost. It was really good. We appreciate the effort and are very grateful. Thank you so much, Sylvie.
Thank you.
And it is my pleasure to introduce now the next speaker, and we move to the next situation and problem. I would like to introduce Whitney Terrell. She's Environmental Justice Program Manager at the Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, where she designs, coordinates, and facilitates community-based programming and partnerships and individual faith communities. Whitney has also been named a fellow of Green Faith. Green Faith is a global, multi-faith, grassroots organization for climate justice. I myself work for Green Faith, and that is why I am especially happy to welcome Whitney. The word is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all and for the invitation. Minnesota has been a central place for pipeline resistance as well. And if you think about where we started with East Africa, and there's Great Lakes there. So I'm going to refer to the Great Lakes in this part of the world. But in this part of the world, we hold collectively with the Great Lakes a fifth of the world's fresh water. So the battle to end basically a reboot of a Line 3 project that was built in the 1960s. That's carrying really dirty crude across the most pristine lakes here, is something that people have been engaged in for over 8 years. Unfortunately, the place project was rerouting through over 200 bodies of water running under 20 different parts of rivers, including the Mississippi River, which is the source of water. Minnesota is, in the northern part of the United States, and, it runs all the way through the country to the Gulf. And so the headwaters of the Mississippi are here in Minnesota, and we're actually preparing to kind of go and have like a prayer circle there, because we're so committed to this clean water. But Line 3, unfortunately, was completed, and even after like years of asking for environmental review and for the permits to also respect treaty rights, I'm joining you. Minnesota is located on the traditional and current homelands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Ho-Chunk peoples in some parts of the state, but primarily the Anishinaabe have a treaty, which is the highest law in the United States, as in most countries, just like the United States would have a treaty with Canada or with Mexico. And those treaty rights have not been respected, particularly the Treaty of 1855. And so Anishinaabe people, in particular Anishinaabe women, as a part of their culture, have been really leading so many different parts of a coalition, both faith-based and non-faith-based, to resist this pipeline. It is carrying millions of crude oil per day. There's also kind of connecting parts to it that are called Line 5, that are part of Michigan and Wisconsin. And we're all talking to each other because we need this pipeline to stop. There hasn't been any cleanup projects. So maybe like in Europe, there's laws where like a company might be responsible for the full impact of like a product that they're creating. In the United States, we don't have those kinds of laws. And so unfortunately, a lot of those pipes are just sitting there in pristine wild ricing lakes. So China and the United States have two of the world's like wild ricing lakes. They're kind of like black rice. It's made like in forms of white rice, but they're wild rice here that Anishinaabe people refer to as manumen. And it's listed in the treaty that I was describing in 1855, like it's a person with rights. So some of you may be coming from countries that like treat the natural world like it should have rights. And more than that it's like a relative. It's not just like an inanimate thing. I often like to think of that as there's a limitation in English that particularly as the language I grew up speaking, that like maybe languages that have gender or who have more it's like you're talking to a person in other languages. Spanish and Arabic are my other languages. And so I feel especially like I can hear that in other languages. So I'm bringing that up to say that I even sometimes mean that we have to be in community and with other people who can help us see the world differently. And I'll say that working in an interfaith context, I've been especially inspired by Catholic workers. For many of you who come from this tradition, I actually first learned about Laudato Si from a colleague of mine in the Green Faith program, James Robinson. And he, this was like his passion to bring this up in our small group talks. And then it really became clear to me when I would meet people who are from the Catholic worker movement. And they decided, I met especially Brenna Kusin Anglada from Wisconsin, and she shared her story, but she and some other Catholic workers, they took it upon themselves to act. They did nonviolent actions and tied themselves and interrupted a pipeline. And so everyone may have different actions that they may take. Some people may pray about it. Some people may act on it. Some people may demonstrate peacefully, but these women, also Michelle Nard Obed of Duluth, Minnesota, Allison Pullman of Denton, Texas, and Daniel Yildirim of Wisconsin, they've all been taking actions to resist this dirty pipeline that we know in Minnesota we don't need, that would be going to the international market. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to raise awareness. You can learn more as well at stopline3.org, where people who faced arrest are still trying to get their charges dropped. But thank you for the opportunity. And I hope that if you take anything away from what I've said, is that you act on your tradition, make Laudato Si a reality, because I'm seeing it in live here in Minnesota, and Catholics are really contributing to the change that we have here. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Whitney, and rest reassured, we do take a lot from what you have shared with us. And we have just heard from many different speakers. And the same way in the Bible, the land should rest and have a Sabbath. It is the same for us as we hear and listen to all this great content. So I would like to pass it on to Magdalena Nocik, who will lead us into a moment of reflection to let all of this sink in.
Yes, thank you very much. And right now I will share a slide with you. And it's a lot of information during this webinar. And let's take a deep breath. And I know that maybe you feel confused, or you feel really upset about all these carbon bumps. And right now, we would like to invite you for a moment of reflection. And please ask yourself these 3 questions that you can already see on the screen. What comes to your mind when you hear our speakers? What struck you the most? What would you like to pray for now? And we would like you to share with us your thoughts, your emotions. And right now, I will invite my colleague from Laudato Si movement, Ashley Kitisia, and she will share with you some tips about how to go through the divestment process on a very local level. And I hope that you can learn something from it. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. Pope Francis states that it is our responsibility to transition to renewable sources of energy as quickly as possible. We therefore call upon individuals, pension funds, cities, universities, foundations, faith-based organizations, and insurers to divest. The Laudato Si movement has a library of divestment resources such as research, videos, and documents. Please fill the form if you have not. So divesting is the process of ending the financial support of oil, gas, coal, and companies that own assets in those fields. If a company wants to divest, they have to sell off any share or investment in the fossil gas industry for an ethical objective, and in this case, it is reducing global emissions. When we divest, the fossil fuel industry lacks the capital to undertake projects, and therefore, the fossil industry becomes less effective. So we encourage investors to shift to invest in clean climate solutions, looking at companies that are working in renewable energy systems, renewable energy access, just transition for workers and communities, and companies that respect human rights and environmental standards. Studies from Corporate Knights and Harvard Business School has demonstrated that it is possible to have sufficiently diversified fossil fuel investment portfolios or divested portfolios to manage risks and outperform broad market indices. Additionally, companies are found to be more valuable to consumers if they divest from fossil fuels. There are currently over 1,500 organizations with assets amounting to more than 40 trillion US dollars that has already sold and are in the process of selling off their fossil fuel investments. So allow me to share the steps for divestment. Identify a person in your organization who is involved in environmental matters, or create a care for creation team. Then find the person in charge of the financial aspects of your organization. Their title can be something like finance manager or financial advisor. Discuss with them about the investments that the organization has, then talk to them about divestment and what that would mean for your organization. Thereafter, sign the divestment pledge at the level that is right for you. Once this is complete, write and update the investment policy of your organization. We know that divestment is not a simple process. Sometimes a company has to partially divest because of financial security before fully divesting from all fossil fuels. For example, a company can partially divest from coal projects, which is the most polluting and least efficient fossil gas. And there are other types of divestment, such as coal only, coal and tar sands, partial, and finally, full divestment from all fossil fuels. Thank you, and I urge you all to divest now.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And right now I will invite my friend so we can give you some tips and tricks how to start this kind of conversations, as Ashley mentioned. So Erin, are you with us?
Yes, hello everyone. We'd like to share some suggestions on how to begin a conversation on divesting. When meeting with a pastor or parish finance committee, introduce yourself and tell your story. How you became engaged and why you are concerned are some of the most powerful tools you have. Share your story and experiences. Continue with a question about your investments and Catholic values. Here's what a conversation might look like.
Good morning. Thanks for your time. The heat waves have really made me realize what's happening to our common home. And I've been reading Laudato Si, Pope Francis' encyclical. So I know that we as a society need to transition to clean energy and stop funding fossil fuels. How we invest in is an important part of that. Do we as a parish have a socially responsible investment policy?
No, I don't think so. Ms. Smith advises us on investments.
Could we research what guidelines our bishops have and meets again? I can contact them. Thank you.
In general, respect your conversational partner and find common ground. Enjoy the conversation. Avoid trying to fit in every point. Ask questions rather than lecture. Try to end on a positive note. Genuinely listen and show that you've heard.
Keep going and stay connected. Every conversation is valuable.
You may feel discouraged by some of the initial responses, but be persistent and pleasant. We are here to offer support, and please fill out the survey. Know that hundreds of faith-based organizations have already divested. Initiating these conversations has a very meaningful impact.
You can also join the fight against funding fossil fuels in other ways, and we turn now to Svetlana Romanko. Lana, are you with us? Dear Lana, you are still muted.
Yes, please talk to your financiers, bankers, insurers, to your Catholic institutions. Talk to everyone who maintains investments into fossil fuels and tell them that fossil fuels feed wars and conflict around the world. Help us to end the war in Ukraine and all conflicts globally. Just to do this one step. It's not easy, but we have all power to do so, and we've been encouraged by the current situation. And the second, what we can do, we can speak about endorsement of fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which means all fossil fuels will stay in the ground and won't be used as a weapon of mass destruction. And the third one, we have to fast and green energy transition, and this money that will become available after you divest them from fossil fuel industry, you can easily divert to the green and clean energy that will benefit all people in the world and won't create more wars or conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your invitation that leads at the end of the call to a call to action in a way for all of us to be in solidarity and support. Thank you, Svetlana. And as I mentioned, we are at the end of our time. But before we move to the closing prayer, we are going to see on the screen all of the speakers of today. And I will invite you to say just one word, but an important one, in your own language. Please tell us all goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Arrivederci. Arrivederci.
Yeah, goodbye.
Ensemble. Au revoir.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the spirit and these nice smiles on the screen. And with these smiles, we close with a video prayer.
Dear friends, as Bishop of Assisi, I am very, very happy to participate in your Laudato Si webinar on the energy and the policy of energy, and to give you a little word and overall to pray with you. I am here as a Bishop of Assisi in a privileged place. This is the place where the young Francis stripped himself of every earthly good to be free and to be a man for God and for the brothers. And so I have the responsibility to give this testimony. We are going to build a new world, and we will build a good world in the measure, to the extent that we interpret the design of God on the world. Also the design of God of energy. Energy is a great gift, but we must use it in a good way. And so the first energy we must put at work in the world is the energy of prayer. When we lift our eyes to God and say to God, as St. Francis used to say, "You are the Creator, Almighty and merciful God. You are the God that gives us all this gift, and we adore Him, and we call upon Him to give us light to use in a right way the energy, so to this extent we will build a good world." I thank you, all the professors who spoke in this webinar and all the people participating in it, for this sensitivity toward this great important issue of our time. And so I want to bless you all and to pray with you and for you. Creator God, through you all things were made, the stars in the sky, the birds of the air, the breath of life beneath the seas. Beauty surrounds us like a love letter inscribed on this earth. Blessed be your name, but we have not lived up to our vocation as protectors of your handiwork. The earth has been plundered and cries out to us. Through our use of fossil fuels, we have filled the skies with gases which are harming our world, your creation. We know that it is the poor who suffer the most from our actions, and we ask forgiveness. We also know that things can change and that we can embark on new paths, restoring our common home and clearing the skies. We pray that those who have decision-making powers will divest from the fossil fuel industry, challenging a big corporation to leave behind this era of destruction and pollution. We pray that political leaders make way for affordable forms of clean energy for all. We ask that workers be treated fairly as we make this transition. Move the hearts of those who seek only profit at the expense of the earth and the poor. May we be guided by your Spirit in courage and determination. Help us to embrace new possibilities, new sources of energy, and set out on this path of renewal. We ask this through Jesus Christ, your Son. Amen. And with the intercession of St. Francis of Assisi, may the mighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Dear friends, it was a pleasure to moderate this session with you. One last word from me is au revoir, and I would like to invite you all in your own language to write down in the chat goodbye so that we see this beautiful diversity. And as I see the messages coming in, I wish you all still a very good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Amen, and have a good day.